Uh, Played at Blackthorne. I'm now just recently moved to Chicago. Um, I've been playing the game for about 10 years, and so welcome to my class on positioning and movement. So the class today is going to be broken down into three different parts. We're going to first look at the simple mechanics of movement. Then I'll be talking about some concepts, and then I'll show you some examples of implementation and application of the mechanics as well as the concepts. So if there's any questions, I'm not looking at my phone screen right now. So if anything comes up in the chat or you just have any questions, go ahead and put it out or ask it verbally. Or Lael, if something comes through the chat, can you just pipe up and ask it for me or for
Yep.
them?
Folks, feel free to type in the chat and I will read it out, or feel free to unmute and ask.
Yeah, thanks. You said it way better than I did. All right, so in the first part, we're talking about mechanics. From a very fundamental level, movement, there's really two main movements that you do within fighting, right? So you first start off in your stance. This is just single sword. And so you have your linear forward and backward movement, right? And so when you do that, you want to first take your step with your front foot, and then you bring your back foot up. So going from the side angle so you can see it more, right? So here's my stance, and if I want to go forward, I step, and then I bring my back foot. And so what I'm wanting to do when I do this is keep my center of mass between my legs the whole time, right? So if I go back, first go in the back, and then bring the front foot back. Okay, so this, if you end up doing it the opposite, right? If you want to go back, doing this is okay as well. But what ends up happening when you do this movement is you're shifting your stance. And so we'll get to that a little bit deeper or later into the demo. So again, linear movement forward to back is right. And you just start typically with the foot that's in that direction. Now for the lateral movement, this is when you're gonna make more of a circle. So if I want to move to my right, again, you start with the foot that's going in that direction. So here, and then bring the back foot in, right? Same thing if you're going in the other direction. When making lateral movements, it's really important to make sure you move the foot that's going in that direction first, because if you do it the opposite, so if I want to go right and I move my left foot back, I do this. And so what happens in this instance is now my legs are bound up and I'm actually really wobbly right now. And so if somebody was to press on me, I can fall over or lose my footing entirely, right? So that's strategically a very bad situation to be in, right? So those are your two main movements, or I guess your four main movements that you'll use throughout all of your fighting interactions for the most part. There are a couple of lunges that you can do that are really important when you talk about closing range. So there's the standard fencer's lunge where you're in your stance and you're just kicking this foot out. This foot stays back, right? So you're just jumping your foot out and you now have this lunge that you can attack with. Alternatively, there's what what's his name? Forgetting his name. Hades, Sir Hades, in Polaris, Rising Winds, he calls the teleport lunge. I found out I've been doing this lunge for years without knowing the technical name or the name that he coined it. This is called the teleport lunge, where it's the fencer's lunge, but now you actually go even further and you can drag this foot. So here, and you do this. So this foot drags across the ground when you do the lunge, and so that gives you additional distance. That lunge is actually illegal in fencing, but we don't abide by fencing rules, so it doesn't really matter for our game. So the fencer's lunge, right, is just, I'm kicking my foot out. And then the teleport lunge is where I drag this foot. So it's a much further and dynamic motion. There's also a couple of other less used mechanical movements. There's the half step, and this makes the most sense when you're like circling with somebody. So Camille, can you come in? So this is Camille, this is my wife. So if we're circling, and we're not going to move very much, but instead of doing a full step or full lunge to close, you just do this little half step. And so this is often a very subtle movement that can change from when you're no longer in range to when you're now just within range. And it's very subtle that your opponent hopefully doesn't realize it, and then you can now get a kill. Thanks. Oh, sorry. And then there's one other mechanic that you can use, and that's called the stutter step. And this is exactly what it sounds like. So you act like you're moving. So I do this a lot now because when I'm fighting, a lot of people have learned that I am really aggressive and I close distance really fast. And so when you are closing distance, a lot of people will say, oh, they recognize that, and then they'll throw a shot, right? And so that's a very vulnerable point. But if you stutter step, when they've become used to you closing, the stutter is, it looks like you're going to go, but you don't. They throw a shot, and then you can move in. So it's really a baiting system in that case. So those are the main mechanics in terms of movement. But now I want to talk about a couple of concepts that are really important in terms of movement and really controlling, or in terms of positioning as well. So this is where I'll need Camille again. So I think one of the most important, not yet, or yeah, it doesn't matter. One of the most important concepts I would say in terms of movement is range control. And so what range control is first off, knowing the different ranges. So in the fighting theory world, there's three ranges. You have A range, B range, and C range, where C range is all the way out here. There's nothing that I can really hit my wife, Camille. I can't hit Camille at all, right? But now B range is when I'm now just able to begin to touch her, and then up to about the first 6 inches of my sword, and then A range is everything below that. So in terms of fighting, when you're fighting somebody, it's really important to be able to control the range, because that way you're controlling the fight, right? Because if in this case, so Camille, so put out your sword. I outranged Camille by about 4 inches. Hopefully everybody can see that. In fighting somebody that outranges you, range control is really important because, okay, I can hit Camille, but she can't hit me. So for this case, I would really want to fight in late B, early C, because, oh, I can snipe her arm or I can snipe that shoulder slot, whereas I'm still relatively safe besides my arms. And so in doing range control, you're doing really the main mechanics of circling, doing half steps to close in this case, and then I can get that snipe. Or you do the full lunge, and now I'm in A range, and I can, or we can really like duke it out. Okay. If there's any questions on the concepts, please go ahead and ask questions. This is, I think, one of the more fundamental parts of this workshop. So next up, we have alignment. So this is online and offline in terms of fighting. So online, right? You imagine there's a center line if we're squared up as fighters, where the center of her chest is lined up with the center of mine, as well as our shoulders. And so we kind of like make this box. And so typically when you're fighting, we'll walk in a circle and we are constantly staying online. But one of the nice things, and this is really easily seen when you have a board, so we're online, right? But when I step off, so when I'm online, there's relatively little that I can get, especially on this side of Camille since she has this dome. But if I step offline now, right? I now have access to this shoulder more easily or this hip, right? So stepping online or offline, if let's rotate. If I step offline on this side, I now have access to this arm, right? And so by changing, what you're doing is you're changing the angle at which you can hit your opponent, and you can now see more of their body. Okay, so that's alignment. Then now there's lanes. No, I want this to single. So in terms of lanes, right? Say you're online, there's 2 lanes, or you have the inside lane and the outside lane. What this is easiest to see when you're like hand matched or like in terms of Florentine. So right now I have the inside lane on Camille and she has outside lane. When you have these different lanes, you can hit different parts. Sometimes you want the inside lane because now, okay, I can hit her chest, whereas she can really only get my arm, right? But now I can also block that out really easily. So if you go with that, right? And then I can snap in. And then it's the same sort of scenario for her as if I get stuck on the outside lane, right? She can snap my arm or my chest as well. So sometimes when you're fighting, okay, now I'm on the inside, or if I'm stuck on the outside, I can step in and move over, right? I'm making this lateral movement from the outside to the inside lanes. Typically, you want the inside lane because that's how you get the shoulder slots. You typically have more killing blows rather than having to do these sniping shots. So this, now taking all of those different concepts and those movements, we can begin to talk about positioning. And really what positioning means in the fighting concept is you want to be able to put yourself in a position where you can hit your opponent, but they don't hit you, right? So in this case, if we're hand matched and we're just going single sword, I want the inside lane every single time because I'm blocking her sword out and I now have all of this access to her inner core, right? So if I go over here, I now have even more access. I can, if she was to move her arm, I would be able to get her hip. I could almost get this hip, but I have to go on the outside to get that. Or I can just chew up all on the inside. Okay. So moving into single sword, we're talking about single sword. These concepts and these movements are important, but they're more difficult to demonstrate. But when we begin to talk about swordboard, I'm just going to use the small punch so you can see more of what I'm doing. And Camille will use this dome shield that I have. For a lot of what we're working with, rotate. For example, it's really hard for me to get the shoulder slot for Camille. When or for me to get onto, sorry. And with fighting this dome, it's really hard to really get anything. I can't get that arm. It's really hard to get that hip. If only when I fake her out can I get something. But if you are fighting somebody with a really good guard, I'm not going to really be able to get anything if we're fighting stagnantly. So I need to put myself in a position or get her to move in a way that I can now have a better position without exposing myself, right? So that's the entire point of positioning, is I'm able to hit Camille while still being protected. So in this case, a nice movement, as I kind of showed earlier, is taking this big step over and getting, this backside. Or one thing that I really like to do is doing a level change where now I'm here and I can go scoop underneath the board. So those are some of the things that you can do with, with the concept of positioning. And so now I'm going to begin to move into sort of applications and implementations of these different things. In terms of closing range, right, this is often the most difficult aspect of fighting when you're fighting somebody that has like really good range control, is being able to come in and actually get to a position where I can strike or hit my opponent. I often get a better chance. Sorry. Okay. So often, like I showed earlier with the single sword setup, a lot of people like to take these big lunges. But in terms of positioning, when I'm here, say I miss, right? I throw a shot. No, don't move. You move the board down before you rotate the hip. I'm here now. She can hit my shoulder, or this shoulder is exposed, and so she could just chop straight down. I'm in a bad position in doing that. So often, what I like to do when fighting board, and I want to close range, sorry. I will throw a single shot that closes off her sword and it will jam it up. And then I can now close. I take this step forward, so now it's a bigger step. And then now I like to fight in A range. And since I'm taller than Camille in this case, I have a better option of reaching over her board or clicking in on this inside of hitting her. Often when you're fighting in A range, if you're a taller person, you have the advantage because you can get over their equipment. In terms of if you're the shorter person, typically what you want to do is you want to lean back and you pull the board up, right? So do it the other way, right? So now I can hit if you rotate a little bit. So here I can hit, but if you lean back and you pull the board up, I can't hit. I have to come even further in to get this. So those are some important aspects in terms of closing and fighting the board. Alternatively, doing this big step and grinding it out in A range, that's often not something that people like to do. And it's often very taxing. Warlord DeVry from Northern Lights, him and I really like to grind it out in A range when I go visit him or he visits me. But those engagements are very, very taxing and tiring. So typically you don't always want to do these big explosive movements and you want to do something more passive. And so doing the half step is often a really nice change. So rotate. So if we're circling, I can't get in. But now if I step, right, I have this half movement. So here can't do anything. Now I have this half movement and hopefully I can get in. Another really nice option with board, and a lot of people that don't realize this, is your stance really matters in terms of your range as well. So here, if I'm squared off in sword foot forward, I can't get that shoulder. But now if I just switch hips, my feet are in the same position, I can now tag that shoulder, and that's a very subtle change, right? I'm not even moving that much. And if you're doing it in a rotation, right, where now I step forward, I'm squared, and he would be moving with me, and he stays in that same distance, I can now attack. So it's really just a simple, this is a very passive movement in terms of you're just changing your foot placement, which foot is forward, and that gives you an additional like 4 to 6 inches of range. And the reason for this is my hips are now pointed forward, so I can reach all the way, right? I'm slanted this way. Whereas if I do it this way, I can only square out my shoulders. I can't really, I have to like really contort and stretch my arm out to be able to hit that location in her shoulder. So those are some differences in active and passive range, closing range, as well as the stance switch. I really like the stance switch in terms of closing or getting an additional access to range. You can do all of these things with all the other styles. So single sword, Florentine as well. Florentine is, I guess, a little bit different when it comes to the stance switch because you have swords in both hands, right? So imagine I have a sword, right? I will have effectively the same reach with both swords. So it's not always the same benefit, but what it will change is the shots that I will have in fighting her side. Let me get a sword really fast. All right, I'm dead. All right. So when fighting right here, sorry, I don't have that much access. Right? I can't even get her with the sword. But now I can get this hit. I can shoot the shoulder much more easily because it's on the same side and I don't have to deal with this board on this side. Right. So a simple stance switch can really change things up in all of your styles. One of the other things in terms of closing range, well, not now closing range, but now retreating out of range. So if Camille is coming in, let's step a little bit forward. Right, if Camille comes in and fights me, so take a step forward, right? If I don't feel comfortable, I want to back up, right? And a lot of people, what you'll see, especially from when I've been fighting in CG, is you fight this very linear battle. You just, okay, I go forward, you go backward, you go forward, and I go back, right? But that doesn't really change anything, and it's not very dynamic. All you're really changing is, okay, I can hit you, I can't hit you, but the angles are all the same. The position is all the same. But now instead is, okay, step a little bit backward. If you close now, and if instead of taking this linear step back, I take a lateral step, I can catch her off the retreat and get, an arm snipe. Or if I retreat into her board side, I'm actually putting more distance between me and her sword. And hopefully I can, get around. Right. This is assuming that he's just taking a very linear movement, and he isn't able to correct or respond. What else? One thing that's also really nice as well, and this is one of my favorite shots on a retreat, is if you're coming in or like you're engaging, and then you say, okay, I'm not getting anything out of this. You can do this back sweep. Let's move. Actually use this for the shot. This shot's really hard to do or to land on a toboggan shield or a dome shield because of how protected the shoulder is. But there you go. And so move a little bit up here. So what you do is you want to move in that direction. Okay. So when I move in this direction, what your fighter will typically do is you'll either move, like rotate. If I even act like I'm going to throw a shot here, a lot of people will begin to move the board. Right. So if I do this, I mean, typically people don't move it that much. Right. It exposes the shoulder a little bit. You're trying to probe a reaction or instigate a reaction of your opponent. And so you go here, and then you take the shot out. And so I'm protecting myself a little bit as I back out. Right. So here, boom. And I'm shooting I'm throwing my shot as I'm going out of range. So typically what your opponent is thinking is, oh, they're leaving or throwing this relatively disengagement shot, but it's actually very lethal on that sword side or that shield side. Those are kind of the main setups, especially with board. I really like to do in terms of positioning and placement. I'm very dynamic and I move a lot, but I like to throw in a lot of level changing because in terms of level change, you get additional access to other parts of their body. So shifting over. Sorry. So here in this position, I really can't access that hit. But if now I dip, this is a level change. All I'm doing is I'm just dropping my weight, right? I'm just bending at my knees to get that hit. So here I can't get it, but now I can, right? So what I like to do is I'll throw my board up. And so what this is doing is I'm protecting my immediate shoulder and potentially my back if you do like a wrap, right? I'm protecting myself and I'm putting myself in a better position to attack as well as defend, rather than just being here. Those are some of my favorite shots. I know Nick does some really good stuff, but he begins to integrate more fates and baits as well. And I think that's something for another tutorial, probably from him. But that's all I really have prepared for today. If there's any questions or comments, I'm happy to talk through them with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Magni. I've got no questions in the chat, but I highly encourage folks to unmute and ask their questions now.
Good job.
Out of curiosity, there's two things that come to mind. One is, as a sword and border, how do you deal with Florentine? And how do you deal with someone who has a significant height advantage over you?
Okay, that's a very good question. Those are two very good questions. So first question was, as a sword and border, how do you deal with Florentine? Let me answer that one first. So, pick it up. So as a sword and border, get in a more aggressive stance. Yeah. So it's okay. My wife doesn't fight, so that's why she's a little awkward. Okay, so as a sword and border, you kind of have to think about, or the way that I go about it is I think about the pros and cons of the situation. I have more defense, which is great, but she has defense and offense. Her defense advantage is lower than mine, right? Excuse me. But her offense advantage is way more, right? I can throw one shot and she can stuff my sword, right? If you just block out, and then just chop my arm off and I can die very easily, right? So, one thing that I guess the first couple of things that I work with in fighting a Florentine fighter is I like to watch what hands they're throwing with. Typically, Florentine fighters fight like they're fighting single sword, but now with an extra sword that they use pretty much only as protection, right? A lot of people are right-handed, so they're mostly using their right hand to throw the shots, and their left hand is just blocking. So if you notice that's the case, then you don't have to worry about that left hand nearly as much, and you can just focus on the right hand. Additionally, think about watching or paying attention to the angle or what they have forward. So in this case, Camille isn't hand matching me, quote unquote. And so what hand matching means is the swords are on the same side, right? So her left hand is now matched with my right hand. If she's flips, we're not hand matched, and we're just kind of like cross-guarded. I don't know the name for not hand match. But if she is hand matched to me, to switch, she actually has a lot. This is more threatening. So flip. And the reason being is when she's here, she can eat my hit up way more. Right. So I have to be more conscientious. But a lot of the benefits that she has on me, right? And this goes for fighting, lefty borders as well, or the offhand board style, is the benefits she has, I also have against her. Right. So if she can hit my hip, boom, well, that's my leg, but it's fine. But I can also do the same thing to her. So when fighting the hand match, I like to think that I'm fighting somebody that is just a lefty. I will mostly keep all of my shots on this side of her because this is the main point of aggression. If she throws this side, right, her right hand, she's going to have to get over my board, or she's going to have to try to hit my hip mostly. I don't have a super lot of exposure on my board side, maybe throwing in to my elbow, but I typically tuck my elbow back so it doesn't get sniped. Okay, so I don't really have to worry about this side. I can just throw here, right? And so here I like to throw a lot of inside chops. Really just doing these straight chop shots because they're faster. And I can hopefully like push their guard out of the way. If you're less comfortable with that, you can throw into the board side foot forward. This is a more defensive stance. You now make it a little bit easier for her to hit my hip on this side. Right, so if we just flip so they can see. So if I hit my hip here, right, you're not really able to get it. But if I flip forward, you would have to, sword needs to go on this angle. Sure, that works. She can hit my hip more easy when my board side is forward, right? But this hip is tucked away more. And so that's, a trade-off in terms of thinking about like the pros and cons. She instigate or she instinctively switched her feet, but if you now like flip, right, you more or less have the same advantage, but she's going to have to reach harder for this hip. And so I would still keep working mostly on this right side. What you can do as well is begin to move deeper and close off this now whole lane. So if I'm offline like this, you can see that my sword blocks both of her swords. Okay. You can also do the same thing on the other side. Stepping offline is really powerful. That's the main point of this. That if I now step here, my board is primarily protecting a lot of her sword lane or like her cone of attack, and I can get around more, right? And so if we rotate, so if I'm even further offline, the more offline I become, the more I'm protected, and the more access to killing blows I have. Does that answer that question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Can you remind me of the second question, please?
Fighting someone who has a significant height advantage, like foot plus.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't have a lot of experience with this, as I'm typically more taller than a lot of people, but I have some experience, especially fighting Sir Bighead from Tal'Dagor. And so, what I've learned with people that are very tall is they really like to rely on their reach, and they really play on range control, right? So since they're taller, they typically have longer range. So, oh, I can snipe your arms and you can't really hit me, or they can't really hit me. But what they don't have a lot of experience in, or they often become worried about, is when you now are in their B and A range. A lot of range control fighters or tall fighters, or like arm snipers as they call it, they don't fight really well in A range. And so I would recommend trying to really go from this late stage, C, where she's in C, but I'm in the start of B. I can begin to hit her, but she can't hit me. If she now lunges in really hard, right, I'm now more exposed and I have to worry about her equipment more. I would say, so I guess try to begin working on closing the distance better or faster, integrating, the half steps, right? So so I can hit her, but she can't hit me. But if we're circling and she does a half step in and I don't notice it, that was very wonky, but now I'm not like conscientious that she's in range. That's one way to do it. Doing the stutter step of, oh, here I go. If a lot of range fighters, when they see somebody trying to, rush in really hard, they'll throw just a shot to try to back you off. If you do that, right? So if I do this stutter, you throw that shot, you expect a shot, so like, sure, I want you to throw here, right? She's expecting that shot, but that's just a stutter. You're trying to instigate a shot, and now they have to like reload. They have recovery time before they can really throw another shot again. So that's when you now explode, boom, throw a hit shot, strike their arm, something like that. It's really, really difficult to do it. I would say if you want to learn how to do this, I would recommend taking the time to learn in Florentine or single sword. I think those are the easiest ways to learn that movement and become comfortable with it. Because if you do it in sword and board, you're gonna have issues with working around the board as well. And like I said earlier, in terms of fighting an A range, if you're shorter, you often have the bigger disadvantage because of that skyhook. Another thing that you could do with people that are significantly taller than you is hit them in the legs. Because now they can't move. They can't use range control as easily, and you just take away their height advantage. So boom, or if you leg me, I'm now all the way down here, and I have to work with the different height advantage. You now have all the height I don't now. You can then become more dynamic with your movements of moving laterally around me. One thing that's kind of rude to do, but it's a very valid tactic, is you just circle them and wait for them to get tired. Again, it's really rude, but it works because a lot of people don't like grinding it out on their knees, and so they'll begin to slouch forward. Oh, my shoulder's exposed. Hit the shoulder. Yeah, I would say those are the main sort of strategies to begin to work with people that have significantly more range and height over you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
We don't have any questions currently in the chat,
Okay.
but I want to encourage folks to ask some more questions. Go ahead and unmute. We've got about 15 minutes left. So time for at least one more question.
Ooh, I've got one. So one of the things that I've had come up in training a lot with is that whenever I try to practice stepping into a grass, a lot of the time I find myself kind of getting tongue-tied with my feet. Is there a good exercise for practicing those kind of half steps and repositioning tools to not, because sometimes what happens is I'll step in and then kind of just my feet just kind of just don't know what to do. They just kind of do a little dance and then I get beat up.
Okay. Yeah. So, what I would recommend is doing drilling. And so it's gonna seem really boring, but you're just gonna do, those lateral movements and those linear movements. You take 10 steps forward, 10 steps forward, do 10 steps back, and then you do, 10 steps to the right, 10 steps to the left. Running that, about for a half hour a day, you're going to begin to build that muscle memory. When it comes to then instinct or integrating that into a fight, your legs now know instinctively what to do, right? When you begin to close more, you're gonna have to think a little bit about it, but it'll begin to work itself out. I guess for a little bit of additional clarification, and maybe so I can help a bit more, at what point are you getting choked up? It's when you initially close, or once you're grinding it out and you can't disengage, or what part of it are you getting tripped up in? No pun
Yeah,
intended.
it's kind of getting into that I guess it's the V range, just getting into the range of being able to hit my opponent. Because a lot of the time, my opponents have a bit more range than I do, and then I take a step in to try to close in, and then at that point is kind of trip up on it, try to take a what's the word I'm looking for? So when I go to step in to actually start to close the gap and start being able to throw shots,
Yeah.
I find that I'm moving my feet too much, and I'm not sure if
Okay.
there's it's It's like too
Okay.
much movement, I guess.
So if you feel like it's moving too much, try to be more reserved and more conscientious of what you're doing in the fight itself. If so, I guess do the drills. Do the drills no matter what. That's going to build muscle memory. Um, in terms of the fights itself, be more conscientious of what you're doing with your feet in the fight. If it means that you have to go into a fight and you're just focusing on your footwork and not even throwing any shots, I would recommend trying to do defending, right? But if you end up just doing that and you lose for just a day, it's not going to feel great, but you begin to learn and realize what you're doing. That's I think a good starting place. That's kind of how I would go through training, on my path to Warlord. Is I would do my homework over the week, watch some videos, learn a couple shots from, other warlords online, other tutorials or whatever. And then the next park day, I would just run that one thing. I would, throw the same setup again and again and again and again. And yeah, I would lose a lot at the end, but by the end of the day, I would have mastered or become very comfortable with that style or engagement, right? It's the same sort of concept that I would recommend for you to do with your feet of, okay, I'm not coming into my park day trying to win every fight. I'm trying to learn what my feet are doing. If what you're doing is, you find out when you're fighting and, if your opponent moves this way and, they move offline and you have the instinct to match them to move back in line, but you move like this, and that's where you're getting tripped up. And you realize that that's something to learn, right? Because now you can take this step, right? That's the starting point. What else? If it becomes as well a big or common issue that I see with fighters, especially young fighters, is what they'll do is they'll lock their knees in an engagement. So they'll come, right, and then they want that extra height, and so they'll lock their knees up, or they'll become straight like a stick, right? I don't have a wide stance here, and so if Camille was to just push me over like this, I'm going to fall over really easily. But if instead I have my center of balance maintained between my legs, if you push me here, I'm pretty stable. And if I have to move my feet, it's a minor adjustment, right? So that it could be something as simple as that, where your center of mass is off, or you're stiffening your legs up. Another bad habit or important consequence of when somebody stiffens their legs or straightens out their legs is if I need to move, I have to bend them and then I can move, right? Whereas if I'm always maintained in this bent stance, a lot of people in CG make fun of me because I fight in this horse stance all the time. Here, I can move, I'm just crab walking more or less the whole time. I never have to worry about, doing the or unstraightening out my legs and then I can move. I'm already ready to move at any point in time and do a massive engagement if I have to. I would say those are the things that I would recommend looking out for. If you begin to realize you're doing one of those things, you're just going to have to take the time to begin, unlearning that or training yourself out of that habit. If you have a buddy that's willing to do some grinding with you, use them as like a tool or an opportunity to begin to do close engagements and doing fights while you're moving. It doesn't matter if, I hit your arm, and counting it as a real fight, but you're working on movement as you're fighting as a dynamic movement or as a dynamic sort of operation. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Thanks.
Alrighty, folks, we've got about 5 minutes left in the class before the next RP session starts. That's very possibly enough time for one last question. Okay, hearing none, I'll ask what I'm going to ask Magni to respond to very quickly. What are the best tips for somebody who's fighting you and wants to win? In terms of winning.
So in terms of fighting me, I recommend. So I know a lot of my weaknesses is when I'm not able to move, right? So I'm giving this class because I move a lot and I'm a very dynamic, high movement fighter. I've learned when fighting other warlords, if they snipe my legs and I'm now grounded, a lot of my advantage, especially in terms of my height and my movement, are now eliminated. So then I no longer am able to control the fight. They can control the fight more easily. So doing that, what else? That's a good question.
Maybe a variant on that question that might help you answer it is like, what's your favorite shot and what is open on you when you throw it?
Oh, okay. So my favorite shot, as I think a lot of warlords, is the money shot. So, yeah, swordboard. So the money shot, right? This is what like a lot of swordboarders love to do to get the stance. It's this shot, right? Boom, boom. Nip throws so many good variants of he'll go one of these, right? And so that's like moving your board around. Depending on how I throw the shot, there's different parts of me that are open. If I throw this money shot like this, with this small of a board, I have actually quite a lot exposed. I have my sword side hip. If I miss the shot, so if you just even simply pull that board in, my arm's exposed, right? And fighting sword board, you take my arm, it's going to be very hard for me to take this fight as a win as an armed or wounded opponent against a sword board. Jamil has way more defense and similar offense as me. If I throw a little bit deeper, right, to get it, if he blocks it with the same shot, my shoulder is now exposed, my back is exposed. Typically, those are the ways that I die when I throw that shot. What else? I would say my other favorite shot, and this is fighting in A range, is I love typically what you're doing here is I'm trying to open this board up, right? So this works really well because we both have punches. My punch is smaller, so I can hook this board, pull, and throw on the inside. If I miss that hook, right, and he blocks it he can hit my outside arm. Or this often happens with Fuzz all the time when I fight him, is we will often simo by throwing the same overhand cross. And so as I hit his inside hip or sword side hip, he hits my sword side hip as well. Yeah, I guess those are the main my main problems. My sword side hip often gets eaten up, especially when I fight him. Yeah. Kill me. Do it. In game. Please. Herbert. Anything else, Lael?
I do not see anything else in the chat. No, thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your knowledge on movement and positioning today, Magni. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alrighty.